Okay, looks good. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to be talking today. So you mentioned in your introduction how AI is generating trillions of dollars, or will generate trillions of dollars in economic progress. I'm going to be talking about an application of AI today that that has no economic upside. But if we don't do it, our world will go down the tubes very quickly. So it's applying AI to a very important societal problem, which is keeping social networks safe from harmful content and harmful interactions. Before I do that, I'll do what I always do when I give talks in Melbourne, which is 10 years ago, I wrote a book about coffee. I went around the world and I drank coffee in 30 different countries. And I'm very proud to say that the best place in the world to enjoy coffee, of all the places in the world, is Melbourne, Australia. I hope you take this as a compliment. Last time I said it, I was actually in Melbourne and everybody was very happy and clapped hands for a long time. So we'll skip that. But I just wanted to mention this. So preserving integrity in online social networks is a very, very broad topic. And actually what I'm giving you today is a very short description of what is written in a survey that we actually published. We put it on archive a couple of weeks ago with these other people that you see on the bottom of the slide. So let's first talk about what is the problem. So, you know, the goal of social networks is to bring people together. It is to give voice to anybody, whether they're famous or they live next door from you. And so in general, the social networks have contributed greatly to society. However, as you know, whenever you provide a platform, whenever you provide a tool for people to share and to talk, that also brings out the worst aspects in humanity. And when you have an online social network, those bad behaviors get amplified, unfortunately, because of the speed of transmission of information. And so common forms of what we call integrity violations are things like hate speech, where people demean other people, misinformation, where people just share fake news, selling stuff that is illegal, like guns. Well, selling guns is actually legal. Selling them on social networks is illegal, or not illegal, it's prohibited. Selling drugs, which is illegal. Child exploitation, which is trying to groom children for various activities that they should not be involved in, and all kinds of other graphic violence and nudity and stuff like that. So, so integrity is that field of trying to prevent all of that or minimize all of that. You'll never get it down to zero. So the problem is defined. Now, it's obviously a very broad problem, and how do you even define it? So what companies, so when I'm talking about social network companies, Facebook is the biggest one. So we have all the possible problems we have on the Facebook platform. But YouTube and Twitter and Reddit and all the other, those are the local ones, but other social media companies have them too. So what companies do is they set up a set of policies, okay? And actually setting up these policies is not easy because you need to trade off a bunch of factors that I'll talk about in a minute. And then they set up systems that enforce these policies. Now, the amount of information, the number of posts, okay, the number of accounts that you see on social networks is so huge that you cannot imagine trying to preserve integrity without automation. Okay, so this is a problem where if you didn't have AI, the platform would just become completely useless. Okay, you have huge amounts of content, You have them in every possible language that is spoken, well, most languages that are spoken around the world. You have cultural nuances. What you're allowed to say in one country or what is considered okay in one country may be very offensive in another country. And you have over 50 different kinds of violations. Okay, I'll give you a list in a moment. And furthermore, it's not a problem that you fix and you can go away. If you create algorithms to protect against bad content, then the people who are creating this bad content, they will find ways around your defenses. So it's constantly an adversarial game where the bad actors are developing, they're learning how those defenses work, and so they're working around them. Now, that's not to say that all the content on social networks, all the violating content is created by malicious people. A lot of content that is created by people who just didn't know that they're violating, and so when they're notified of that, they fix their behavior and they don't do that anymore. The reason it's hard is because there is a balance between, I mean, the whole idea of social networks is giving people a voice. Everybody should be able to, anybody should be able to say anything. On the other hand, if there are no rules, then these things get out of control. So the policies need to find a very delicate balance between free expression and safety, okay? So that's one, again, you'll see this. When we talk about integrity, we talk about posts, the stuff that is actually being shared. We talk about accounts that can belong to bad actors or just fake or just misrepresenting people. We're talking about the post itself and the replies to the post. So you can actually have replies to posts that are very hateful. You're talking about messaging applications where people communicate between pairs of people, and there's bad stuff happening there. And there's also bad stuff happening in ads. So people put fake ads or ads, political ads that shouldn't be there. So so again, this is a very broad topic. So I'll give you some idea for the main trends in this field. Now, when you give a talk about this topic and you're coming from Facebook, it's very easy to assume that everything I say is something that Facebook is doing. Where actually what I want to do is talk about the field, the academic field of preserving integrity. So unless I actually tell you we do this at Facebook, don't necessarily assume that, okay? So I'm not endorsing particular techniques unless I actually tell you that we're doing it at Facebook. Okay, so I'm going to define the problem, which actually is quite a bit, is not easy, okay? I'm going to give you a framework for how we think about preserving integrity. And then I'll sort of give you a quick overview of some of the techniques that people are using that have proven to be very useful in practice. Okay, so here's an example of the community policy. So the problem of integrity is defined by the set of policies that every company puts out. Okay, so what I've done in this table is and again in the survey you can see many more examples. In the second column you see stuff that you can't do. On the third column you see stuff that is closely related but you can do it. So for example, you're not allowed to incite violence or admit to violent activities on Facebook. This is actually taken from the Facebook community standards. Okay, so we define what violent activities include. They include terrorism and organized hate and stuff like that. But for example, you are allowed to provide instructions on how to create explosives if there is a clear context that it's not for non-violent purposes. Okay, part of an educational video. Okay, so this is, you can already see that nuance may actually be challenging for a human to see, let alone a computer algorithm. Or another example is you're not allowed to sell firearms or illegal drugs on Facebook. but you can debate the laws governing the sale of these items in general. So you can talk about the fact that, oh, I should be allowed to buy guns, but you can't actually sell guns. Okay, but again, these are nuances. So the policy team in the policy teams in these companies works very hard to create these very nuanced policies. Now, the main problem is that things are extremely subtle. So, and it's very hard to set absolute rules. So you could assume, right, that there's a simple rule that says you can't pose photos of nude children. Okay, anybody would agree that this is a universal rule to follow. However, the picture that you see here is a Pulitzer Prize winning photo by Nick Ut of this Vietnamese girl who was running away from a bombing in Saigon in 1974. Okay, now this photo became a cultural icon. It was representing the struggle that was going on in Vietnam at the time, and so it clearly a photo like this is something that should be okay, or some would argue would be okay to post on a social network. I already mentioned that we have over 50 kinds of violations. Okay, it's amazing how many ways people abuse social networks. So you have people who are creating abusive accounts. You have violations of privacy. People are trying to get private details from people. There's spam. There are financial scams. There's adult sexual exploitation, solicitation. There are people who are trying to incite violence, bullying, everything, every bad thing exists there. Now, it's important to note that it's not like one day people got up and came up with a list of all the violations that people will engage on social networks. All these things were sort of discovered as they were happening on social networks, and as they were discovered, they create, companies will create teams to, handle every new problem. One of our goals in the presentation today is to actually look at the field from a technical point of view, where we develop techniques that are useful for multiple problems, multiple violation types. Okay, so 2 words about how the violations, how the enforcement pipeline goes. So on the top, you see here the stuff that is actually happening on the social network. So people are creating accounts, content is being posted, people are posting comments, and so on. Okay, now the content that comes in, it gets posted, and 2 things happen. One is it goes through AI systems that try to detect whether the content is violating one of the, say, 50 violation types. Okay, if the AI system is extremely confident that it is violating, it will actually automatically remove it. But that doesn't happen too often. I mean, it happens quite a bit, but it doesn't. But that's not the major major mode of or major fraction of violating content. The other way that we get violating content is, or we know about violating content, is that users complain. Users that have a way of going and telling Facebook, for example, that this content is they found is violating. Okay, so we're getting two sources of suspected violations. One is from the AI systems, and one is from users. And then what we do is, again, I'm describing what not just Facebook does, but most social networks. The content goes to a set of humans or workforce of humans that give it, that make the determination. Now here we need to distinguish 2 cases. If it's things like community violations, like violence or nudity or even hate speech, then that goes to a workforce that is trained by the social network that knows the policies well. And every post gets looked at by multiple people. And if there's agreement that that it's violating, that it gets taken down, um, and life continues. Okay, the people who post the content are given the opportunity to appeal, um, but um, but if the content is determined to be violating, it could be deleted, or the account is deleted, or in some cases, for example, you might even call the local law enforcement to go in and see what is going on. In the case of misinformation, which is a very common occurrence and highly or gets a lot of attention, the social network doesn't make the decision of whether to remove it or not. So for example, Facebook doesn't want to be the body that decides what is true and what is not true in the world. So what it happens in this case is there is a set of third-party fact checkers, okay, that look at misinformation posts. They do the research. They come from the full range of political spectrum, and they make the determination of whether something is misinformation or not. Okay, it's not a social network company that does that. That's an important distinction. Okay, before we go on, I think it's useful to look at the different kinds of enforcement that you can actually imagine. Okay, so if it's clearly violating content, you just remove it. If it's nudity or something like that, you just remove it. Another way to deal with content that is maybe a little more borderline violating is to downrank it. So when you come to your social media stream, obviously one of the big decisions that every company needs to make is the ranking of the posts on your stream. So if the violating content gets downranked, the probability that you will see it goes down by quite a bit. So that's another technique. Another possible technique that should be considered is maybe there's content that is violating for certain people and not for others. So maybe you want to make a personal decision, just like you make a personalized decision about what content to show. Maybe you want to make a personalized decision of whether to show certain content that might be violating or not. So again, I'm just giving these as options when you think about the broader view of what to do with such content. And then you can just talk about the fact that look at your entire news feed, the stuff that you see on say your Facebook stream, and say, let's look at all the experiences that you have there and try to maximize the positive content and minimize the negative content. So you're taking a much more holistic view of content on your news feed. Okay, it's really important if you're going to have a huge team working on integrity that you be able to measure whether you're doing well or not. So unfortunately, measuring the success of integrity algorithms is not so easy. And I'll just talk about the main one, which is prevalence. Prevalence is how much, what is the percent of violating posts that the system identifies. You want to make sure that of all the posts that are violating that exist on a social network, you're getting as much of it as possible. The problem is there's nobody looking at the whole thing, right? Because you don't know the complete picture, right? So you can look with respect to a sample. That's one way of measuring the prevalence. So you look at a bunch of posts that your algorithm didn't catch, and you look at how many of them are violating. It's sort of like measuring the recall of web search. You don't know, you're doing a search on a trillion pages. You can't look through the trillion pages to see whether your recall was perfect. Now, fine, that's one issue, but not all posts have the same visibility, right? So some posts are viewed by 3 people, others are viewed by millions of people. So what you really want to count is not the number of posts that are violating, is you want to count the number of bad experiences. How many people have seen posts, or how many times people have seen posts that are violating. That's really the measure that you want to count. But even that's not enough, because there are some violations that are very severe and some violations that are maybe borderline, and so you really want to weigh the severity of the violating content when you count, right? So maybe you'll put more effort on very violating content to make sure that doesn't go off, but not the be a little more lenient on the borderline stuff. Basically, as you can see, this is a complicated topic, and measuring this is very hard. Facebook and other companies publish every 6 months a report on several measures and what progress is being made. All you have to do is Google something like Facebook transparency report. Okay, let's now talk about when you think about integrity from a technical point of view, what are the ways that you can, what are your levers, okay? So I divided into 3 parts. The stuff that is happening before the post itself, and the stuff that is happening after the post, okay? So before the post, right, there's some real world event that is going on, right? So if people are in some sort of demonstration somewhere and they're getting all riled up, that's the real world event. So if you can figure out what are the events that are going on and where these posts are coming from, that might be a good signal to what is what is the level of arousal that is going on there. You can look at the users in the organizations that are posting. So they are, for example, users who have posted violating content in the past are more likely to do that again. Another thing that you see is coordinated activities. So you'll see sets of users or social bots that together are trying to amplify content that is should not be amplified. And then you also have something that is very recent, is media manipulation. So you have some content, and then you change it in such a way that is no longer representative of any truth. So you can have, for example, any politicians, now with AI methods, you can have any politician basically say whatever you want them to say, right? Because you can take the text and make their lips move in ways that look like they said it. So understanding users, events, and manipulation is one set of techniques. When you look at a post itself, there are things that you can do to try to look at the content and see what's going on. So the language, obviously, the images and the video on the content on the post will be very indicative. If there's audio, you'll also hear arousal or moods in that. And as I'll explain in a moment, usually posts have multiple modalities. They might have text and images together, and that actually introduces some really, really interesting challenges. So that's the post itself. Then comes the stuff that happens after the post. So people react to the post with a bunch of emojis, they write comments, they reshare the content to others, and looking at the speed and the virality of this content and the reactions and what is the tone of the comments is actually a huge signal to detect whether something is violated. The only problem with that is by the time you're seeing a lot of data about reactions, it's by nature the case that a lot of people have already seen the post, and so you want to do this as quickly as possible. So the point I'm trying to make here is that a combination of techniques that look at the stuff that happened before the post, or the source of the post itself, and the reactions to the post, these techniques, if you put them together in different ways, can be used to address a variety of violations that we see on social networks today. So if you're doing research on this topic, you're probably looking at one of these categories of technical innovation. Okay, so now I'm just gonna, since I'm almost out of time, I'm just going to quickly go over a few techniques that have been used recently to great success. So the first area is, Tomohiro, please tell me how much time I have left.
Oh, you can still have a time. Yeah. So at the most 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Please.
Good. So natural language processing is the field of trying to understand what is being said in text. Now, natural language processing has made huge progress in the last few years due to what's called pre-trained representations. These are machine learning models that are trained on huge corpora, and what they do that is interesting is they learn multiple linguistic ways of saying the same thing. And so they're able, so if you have, for example, a hateful phrase, but then somebody says it in some other slightly different way, linguistically structured, these models will recognize that these things are very similar to each other. So these models have been used with great success in preserving integrity. The other thing that happened in natural language processing is that we've gotten much better at machine translation. And what these systems do is they actually take text in one language, they encode it in some internal representation, and then they output it in another language. Okay, and the reason this is important is because it saves you from having to create a machine translation system between every pair of languages in the world. Okay, so because you have this central encoding, this internal encoding that doesn't matter what language it comes in from, you can output it in something else. The other important thing about it is that there are many languages for which we don't have a lot of data. And so machine learning systems don't do very well when there's not a lot of data. If you can actually leverage knowledge from other languages in order to be able to predict in a language with low resources, then you're able to actually make great progress in those low resource languages. So Burmese is an example of one of those languages, and so systems like this have been used quite well to detect hate speech in Burmese, for example. So these techniques, what they do is they focus on what is actually being said in the text. But sometimes it's not what is being said, it's like how you say it, okay? So if people sound extremely excited, okay, or extremely positive or extremely negative, that valence, okay, that they call it in psychology, valence and arousal, okay? So the valence is whether it's positive or negative, arousal is whether you're stating it in a very extreme way or in a very mild way. So if you can actually identify the affect of the text, then you can actually sometimes, and this is an area that is just starting to be researched carefully, you can actually find some text that might be misleading or hateful. It's also possible to look at the text and see whether it's very subjective, and that could give you a clue as to whether something is being deceptive or not. Incorporating external knowledge. So if you have, for example, misinformation, right? So what you want to do is you see somebody talking about a new cure for the coronavirus, right? Well, maybe you want to check it against other claims that have been made in the past, right? You have a database of claims that we know certain things don't cure COVID, and we know some things, well, we don't actually know what cures COVID yet, but we know that a lot of things don't. So you want to match against previous claims in the past. And so today, the state of the art is pretty simple. You're trying to sort of do a direct match from what you're seeing and previous content. But essentially what you're trying, in the future, what we're actually trying to do is look at a post, extract the claim, what is the actual claim they're trying to make, and then match that claim against a database of facts that we know, okay? This is an area that is being researched, and there's a lot of stuff we know about the world, but we don't actually encode it anywhere yet. But if we can encode stuff about the world, like hateful speech or fact or misinformation claims, then we can do a better job at matching new hoaxes or new hateful speech to stuff that we've seen in the past. But this is stuff that is current and future research. Computer vision has also made huge amount of progress in the last few years. Again, all of these things are due to large pre-trained models. One of these images is of marijuana, and the other image is of fried broccoli. Now, I would challenge you, if we were in person, I would challenge you to tell me which one is which. And it's pretty hard. I think the one on the left is the broccoli, but I actually don't remember. And I'm looking at them, they kind of look the same. The point is, computer programs have become better than humans at detecting nuances like this. Okay, so that's amazing. But so computer programs are good at doing that, but sometimes it's the combination of text and images that really creates the challenge. So let's look at this example here, and what I've done is made it non-specific, right? So you can imagine somebody posting something, everybody in your ethnic group, replace ethnic group with a particular name, right, belongs here. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying everybody in your ethnic group belongs here, the text by itself. But when you overlay that on a photo of a cemetery, that becomes hate speech. Why? Because you're essentially saying you should all be dead. But it's that combination of the image and the text, each of which is benign by themselves. It's that combination that makes this hate speech. And this is a very active area of research right now in AI, which is we've made progress on computer vision, we've made progress on text understanding, but it's putting that multimodality together that is really the challenge. We have a system at Facebook called whole post integrity embeddings, which basically what it does, it takes the entire post, so it looks at the multiple modalities, text and images and video if it's there, and it creates an embedding for the post. So it's a representation in a very high dimensional space, such that if two posts are close together in that space, then they are more likely to be either both violating or both non-violating. And this is a system that we use that has been very successful in production. So you can see, for example, these examples where nothing looks bad, but these are examples of trying to sell drugs. But really what's happening is it's the text and the image coming together to give you the clue that that's what's going on. So that, I'm going to skip this example to finish on time. So I'm not going to go into behavioral signals because, again, you can imagine that depending on the reactions that you see to a post, we can get a lot of signal from that. So in summary, Preserving integrity is a huge challenge, and as you can see, it's pushing AI forward. We're fortunate that AI is making so much progress these days, and when you focus on the problem of integrity, you're actually pushing the field forward in interesting ways. There are a lot of challenges that I didn't talk about, like we have a human workforce. We need to make sure that they are resilient and accurate, and they're not suffering too much because they're seeing some pretty bad content. We need to do all of this integrity work under the assumption that everything is private, and that means we get to see less of the content, so we don't have as many signals as we did before. But I want to finish on an uplifting note, which is what we're doing here is we're applying AI to one of the most important societal problems that we're dealing with as a population of this planet. And so hopefully this can inspire people to look at other societal problems and apply there too. So AI can be part of the solution for many of the important problems that are facing humanity today. And this work is showing that that is making a huge difference. So I'll stop here and take questions.
Thank you, Alon. Can you please stop sharing?
I will, yes. There.
Okay. Does it look okay, or just I have to swap?
Yeah, you need to do that.
Does it good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your fascinating talk. And I also agree that this is a very important area, even for society as well as for academia. We really have to work on this area, work hard. And from now, I want to have a discussion with you, Alon. And here's a logistic again. After the discussion, there's a time for Q&A. Please post your question if you have by using Q&A function. And if you can, you probably can see several questions. If you would like those questions to be addressed, please upvote. And then, so before we jump into Q&A, I want to have a bit discussion about, so thank you very much for your insightful talk. And because most of audience is from business professionals or let's say public sector. Of course, we have academics, but can you please elaborate more about what is the implications to business and organization, or much wider to the society?
Are you talking mostly about the work that I was talking about, or in general?
So in general, yeah.
So I think, I think AI is making a huge difference in the way corporations work. I mean, there are. Let's talk first about the work that I just talked about.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a defense mechanism, right? I mean, if without these techniques, a product like Facebook or YouTube would be completely useless because it would be full of junk and nobody would come there. And so as a result, all the benefits of social networks would not be offered, right? So essentially what you're doing here is you're providing enough of a protection mechanism so the product can actually shine, okay? And the same thing happens in fraud detection, right? If you're a credit card company, right, you need to protect your users from your credit card holders from fraud, and so that's done through AI techniques. Because if you couldn't do that, there would be too much fraud, and then you wouldn't be able to offer credit cards anymore. So in some sense, AI is a a protector of products in that way, right? Because it's taking care of the bad stuff. Or spam, same thing, right? If you didn't have a spam filter, right, which is also AI, your email would be useless because it would be full of spam. You wouldn't be able to find any good stuff. So I think we talk about we talk a lot about the efficiencies that AI offers, right? And AI can sometimes see patterns and give you efficiencies that you couldn't have imagined before. But it's also that the fact that it's actually giving you the ability to focus on the good things in the product that I think is a big difference.
It's a very insightful idea. And I want to dig into more detail about the AI area, because this is my feeling. This is not clear definition, but so to AI be efficient, quite often the problem is, let's say, clear, and we impose the right question. The rule is clear. So if everything is clear, then AI is very efficient. But on the other hand, like your talk, quite often subjective judgment comes in, typically human. We feel something. And quite often the other side comes in management business quite often. Then the problem of integrity discussed here seems to be a bit challenging, because AI needs to handle subjective inputs and subjective outputs. And even human may not have a clear answer to this pose, let's say. Then what's your thought about AI can learn human subjective judgment, intuition, or gut? What's your thought? Can you share your thought?
Sure. So this is it's a really interesting question. There are multiple levels at which you can answer this question. So if you look at the history of AI, it started with what's called logical approaches, where you could write rules, right? And the languages for writing the rules were easy, but AI could only do tasks that were defined by rules. Okay, so for example, it could prepare your taxes because that's guided by rules, but it couldn't identify whether there is a person in an image, because you can't write rules to tell a system whether there's a person in an image. Okay, now the approaches to AI that are based on machine learning, they don't write rules. What you do is you're just giving examples. This image has a person. This image doesn't have a person, and you give enough of those examples, and the AI system learns. You can think of it as rules, but it's rules that are so complicated that no human would ever be able to write them. These are rules with billions of conjunctions, right? So now AI is learning to do stuff for which you cannot write rules, but the subjectivity is still there. So the subjectivity that an AI system, so AI system will be biased depending on the data that you're giving to it. Okay, so for example, if you only show it images of people with light colored skin, and when you train it to identify whether there's a person in an image, and then you show it an image of a black person, it'll say, no, there's nobody here, right? Because, or it might say there's nobody here. So there is subjectivity, or I should say bias, right? So if there's a bias in your training data, that bias will be reflected in the performance of the system. Now, subjectivity, whether something is hateful, whether something is a hateful phrase or not, is to a certain extent subjective, right? I mean, yeah, there's stuff that is clear, but then there's stuff that is subjective. And I would say that AI systems don't actually deal with subjectivity in a principled way. They'll just get confused. Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. It'll basically boil down to what examples they've seen in their training, okay? And if there are a bunch of humans looking at the decisions, then you're gonna look at the majority or something like that of the labels. So I don't think we have actually realized that certain things are inherently subjective. So there's a difference between subjective and really complicated, right? Subjective is, there is no ground truth. Really complicated means I just can't explain, there is a ground truth, I just can't explain to you exactly how I came to that conclusion. We're better with the complicated. I don't think we're very good with the subjective yet.
Yeah, so thank you very much, because actually the things that I just felt I couldn't explain clearly, but because like a chess game, AI can learn quickly, and now the world champion was beaten a couple of years ago, I know, and because the outside is still in progress in AI, and I want to dig into detail more. And future of AI's capability. So the vertical axis is required skills for big data plus science. Science kind of analytical, logical, everything is clear, rule is clear. And the horizontal axis is the red color is required skills for art side. Let's say creativity, consciousness, emotion, and so on. Quite often, as we probably feel shared the similar opinion. If the rules are clear, let's say objective, many things are objective. Under this circumstance, AI is very efficient. So typically this area requires skills for art is low, but requires skills for big data and science is high. This area is, AI is, I feel, is very efficient. But however, typically this bottom area or around here, when outside comes in. So for example, leadership of leading organization. As a leader, we have to motivate people, we have to align people, and these things are very kind of not exactly science, but the gut and feeling will come in. Because when we lead people, we try to, let's say, to lead people, it's not 100% not the logic, but something more is needed. And I just want to ask you, what's your thought about the prospect of AI's capability in the future, typically outside, creativity, consciousness, and emotions?
I think that's a really hard question. So actually, there is a field called affective computing, which is trying to understand the emotions of your users, so you can tailor the response that a system gives you to be more appropriate. My hope is, right, so people, let's take the flip side of this, which is people ask, if AI is going to get good at everything, then what are humans going to do on this planet, right? So I think it's actually a good thing that AI is not very good at the creativity and the emotionality aspects. I think it's, creativity, you can argue that AI is pretty good, but creativity is, not all creativity makes sense. The things that people the creative things that people like are ones that somehow touch their emotions. Okay, so emotionality also is pervades fields like creativity, right? I mean, if the reason we love the great symphonies is because they evoke emotions. It's not because they're just a random set of notes put together, right? There is something that that is interesting there. I think that AI will make progress in trying to understand the emotional responses of its users. And so, for example, if you're talking to your home assistant and you're raising your voice, maybe it's giving you the same answer again and again. You're raising your voice; it'll understand that you're frustrated, and so maybe it'll try to give you a completely different answer, or tell or apologize that it doesn't really know the answer. But I think that's a point where humans are always going to be superior. So, and I think that's a good thing. So I think the skills that are going to be important in the future for humans are those that are just what we are as humans, right? It's the fact that we can show empathy, that we can actually care and listen and be humans to each other. And that's the beauty of what we bring to this world.
I agree. I completely agree. Because why I asked this question was because some business area AI once we put, let's say, brand logo, AI quickly creates it. In 10 minutes, it creates it. Used to be, it takes a long process to create a brand logo. Marketer, designer, they listen the idea, vision of the company, and what they want to achieve, what's a business domain and so on. Then based on that, the designers, and marketers, they were co-creating the brand logo. But nowadays, AI, the customer side, they just type, which industry are we at? And what's your brand name? What kind of logo do you like? Once we specify it, AI will automatically create some brand logo. I'm not clue. I have no idea how it works, but this is going on. And the creativity is kind of making progress, but I agree with you because kind of empathy and feeling emotions, taking care of our colleagues or society and each other is very, this area is also I have a doubt. And because the audience are from business professionals, I want to move on to next question. It's about the best mix of human experts and AI. This most left-hand side is human expert. They make a judgment 100% every time. The other extreme is AI will make a decision every time, like product recommendation. Typically, for example, in fashion industry, Stitch Fix, it's a fashion retail. Stitch Fix, they are using machine learning and AI extensively. And machine learning and AI produce a recommendation to stylist, and then stylist will decide a style to recommend their client, consumers. And human expert is supported by AI in this case. But AI, sometimes AI will do everything, like Uniqlo. Recently, they introduced 100% AI service. Customers just say, oh, this is what I want. And then AI automatically recommends something, whether it is great or not. This is the system I realized. So I want to come back to your very important research area, the integrity of online social network. What is your thought about a best mix of human experts and AI?
So first of all, in general, I'm much more of a fan of human experts supported by AI. I think the promise of AI is to make humans more capable. Okay, let humans focus on the stuff that they do best, and AI will do what computers do best. So that's the general approach that I take. Now the uses, they depend on the context, right? So if you're getting billions of posts per day, right, you have no choice but to have AI make a lot of decisions. And then now you have to be careful about that. You need to be able to appeal the decisions. You need to be able to you have to sort of trade off recall and precision. So you need to find the right balance. So if your volume is so big, you don't have a choice, right? Now, on the other hand, if your decisions are fewer and they're extremely critical, then you definitely want the human to be the one in charge at the end of the day, right? You don't want to hand your system to AI to make very, very critical decisions. So in integrity, we have no choice. In integrity, we have way too many content coming online all the time, and so we have the mechanisms in place to let people appeal, let humans make decisions that the machines can't make. So when a machine looks at a post, if it knows that it's violating for sure, it'll take it off. But if it's not, it'll give it to a bunch of people to look at. And so now the trick becomes, how do you make sure that these people who are looking at possibly violating content are seeing as few posts as possible, right? Because you can't afford to hire 1 billion people. So you need to find the right trade-off there.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's typically the human expert, typically the CEO position, let's say, or C-suite position, probably for the current technology of AI, it's a very hard job for AI to implement their roles typically, because still experience got it quite often, as you mentioned, the decision is very important because it's the direction of the firm. Sometimes maybe strategic change, and yes, but it depends on the context. I agree, and but we have to think about the things every time in business and organization as well.
Yeah.
And the good thing of AI is that, as you mentioned, if volume is large, no choice. So because this is the last question I'm prepared. So because you are an expert of database management and AI, are there any tips or advices for businesses and organizations they handle similar problem, the database and management? What's your general advice to them?
So I like to think of AI as the data is very important, right? But AI helps you make sense of the data. So that's one thing. So making sense of the data is sometimes answering questions that are inductive in nature, right? So there aren't rules. You're looking at examples, positive and negative examples, and you're making some prediction, right? If there is a rule, then you can probably write it in SQL or whatever database query language you use, and then you can get the answer from your data. So that's one area. The other area that AI becomes useful is, and this happens everywhere, is that you have many data sets, right? Every organization has thousands of data sets that are created for different purposes. But when you actually want to ask a question, you might actually need to combine data from multiple data sets. Now, these data sets were designed for different purposes, so they don't talk to each other. It's called data heterogeneity or data integration. So AI has been extremely useful in trying to understand how one data set relates to another data set. I wrote a book about that. So that's another area. But I think if you look at the data assets of a company, right? It's kind of a mess, right? But you can use AI to help you focus your human attention on areas where fusing together the data would actually give you a lot of value. Okay, it's not a pure data management problem. It's a data management problem that is very uses techniques from AI. So it's when things get messy in your data, that's where AI comes to help you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, because to become, let's say, analytics-driven organization, we need executives' commitment and we need a culture so that we embrace the analytics and also database is the key and talent. AI is one of the kind of pseudo talent, maybe. But thank you very much for your thought. Because we have got a lot of questions from audience, I want to bring some questions from the audience from now.
Okay.
Now, the top one. Can you advise to stay up to date with research happening in big data, AI, and analytics?
Say that again.
Can you advise to stay up to date with research happening in big data, AI, and analytics?
Today it's easier than ever, right? Because there's so much stuff available. On the other hand, there's so much going on that it's hard to keep up. There are a bunch of Hacker News talks about all kinds of things that are happening. If you have a particular one possibility is if you follow the right people on Twitter, you'll get a lot of information. I follow a newsletter from Andrew Ng. Andrew, his last name is NG. He's the founder of Coursera and one of the great machine learning people. He actually sends a newsletter once or twice a week, and I find he summarizes certain areas of progress in new developments in AI in a really concise way. So there are a bunch of these sources of information that, and again, it depends on what your background is, how much you know. Are you trying to get deep technically, or are you trying to understand the business implications of a particular technology? But there's a ton of stuff out there.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of questions to you. Okay. The next question is, bad agents also employ AI, spam, misinformation. What are your thoughts on this competition between good agent AI and bad agent AI?
Usually the good agents are are using more sophisticated AI. That's it's going to be a struggle that is with us for a while, right? I mean, especially with the ability to generate new images and new, right? The media manipulation, right, is a great opportunity for bad AI to create stuff that looks very, very, very compelling, very convincing. It's going to be a struggle for a very long time. Sometimes the way to, what is important is to look at where the data is coming from. Okay, so whenever you're looking at a piece of data, is it coming from a source that is reliable, or someone who's reliable and giving it from a source that is reliable. So we call this in the lineage of the data. So no matter how compelling it is, where did it come from? That's always going to be at the end of the day, that's going to be the answer to whether you should believe it or not. So that always got to pay attention to that. And so what we need to do, in addition to developing techniques for good AI, is we also need to develop techniques that will track that lineage very clearly, so you can easily flag to a person, this is coming from an unverified source versus this is coming from, the New York Times.
I see. Yeah. So next question. What do you think is the most interesting sub-area where the novel research or novel progress is needed at the most?
Novel progress is needed the most. So I think I have a bunch of answers to that, but I'll give the easy one.
Yeah, you can please share.
So I think if you look at the history of AI, we started with symbolic AI, right? Symbols and logic and rules and stuff like that. Today, we're doing machine learning. And the machine learning is very powerful. And the machine learning models are trained on more and more and more data, and the number of parameters that they have is bigger and bigger. But that can't be the final, the ultimate technique of AI. So I think what's going to happen in the next few years, if people can figure it out, is to combine the techniques of symbolic AI and of machine learning. So you can also tell machine learning, you can't just tell the machine something. You need to give it examples, negative, positive examples. In symbolic AI, you can tell the system, now the ball is on the table. Okay, so the combination of these two AI paradigms is going to be the key to unlocking future applications. It's also going to be the key. Right now, very few companies can afford to build these very, very large models, or to build them and to deploy them. We need solutions that make AI as accurate or even more accurate than it is today, but are cheaper and easier to deploy. I think that's going to be one of the big areas.
Thank you. And can you tell how social media companies manage their data for best user experience?
How do they manage their data? It's not anything, it's not rocket science. So the most important thing is, there are a few things. One is everything is fast. Okay, so you need your data to be stored in ways that you can retrieve it very quickly. The next big challenge is you need to, the number of possible posts that you can see on your Facebook stream is huge. So the ranking is one of the most important things, right? So how do you figure out what to show, how to rank the posts on your newsfeed? That's a really, really hard problem, and that's where a lot of the effort at any social media company goes. So it's speed, reliability, and relevance.
Let's see. Next one. What is your opinion on the potential and the limitation of AI in social media?
So the potential, the potential is huge, right? If you think about, it, right? AI looks at everything you do on social media. So it knows what you're paying attention to, what you're interacting with, who you're interacting with. So in some ways, it has more knowledge about you than you might even have about yourself. Because if you ask a person, what did you pay attention to on your social media stream? if you were asked to write it down, that answer might be very different than what you actually did, right? So the patterns in your behavior, which are very hard for every person to describe them, the machine actually knows all this information. So now what happens is AI knows you in some ways better than you know yourself. Okay. Now the question is, what does it do with that? So the biggest one issue is the perception, right? So some people just don't feel comfortable that there's somebody or something that knows them better than they do. And so the perception that companies could use that in a malicious way is something that social media companies need to deal with. So that's one limitation. The limitation is in the perception of what can be done with AI. Now, fortunately, what these companies are trying to do is they're trying to actually give you content that you like, that will make you interested. And they try to give you ads that you might click on. So right now, what is done with all this information that the computer knows you better than you do, is done in order to improve your experience. Now you can imagine if this technology gets into the wrong hands or the wrong governments, that can be used for less positive purposes.
Thank you. So I would like to understand the future challenges for AI in social media. What's your thought?
Future challenges. I think, like in the area of integrity, the challenges have to do with the fact that everything is very subtle. Not everything. A lot of things are very subtle, very cultural, which means that AI needs to be extremely powerful in order to understand that a certain phrase is hateful or not hateful. So this is we're not nearly done with this agenda. We're in fact, I would say we're just starting. So there's plenty. Humanity is so rich in all of its nuances that I think AI is not having AI understand the nuances of culture is a huge challenge.
I see. Yeah, thank you very much. So because I want to throw a question from different angle, because you are CEO of Kohn, and because I teach I'm teaching at business school, and quite often as a top of the organization or C-suite, we clearly set a vision and direction, and we come up with a strategy and execution and monitor KPI and so on. Are there any advice to C-suite executives or directors, managers relating to AI, big data, analytics area? Are there any advice to them in general? What is
Well, so first of all, I think one step before that, when you develop a product, think of all the ways that it can be misused, right? So when Mark Zuckerberg developed Facebook, he wanted to let people communicate with each other. He didn't imagine, maybe imagined, but he couldn't, he didn't imagine that people would use this platform for all the negative things. So think about the negative consequences early on. That doesn't mean you have to do something about them right away, because you're trying to first get some traction, but think about the possibilities early on. Think about privacy early on as well. Think about data protection. So not everybody should be able to access all the data. Put in place data access rules in the company very early on. So these are things that will, if you don't do them, will cause you major headaches, and they're harder to change later on. So that's, I guess, one set of things to say. And sometimes it's very appealing to use AI for something, but you don't need to. Just saying that you're using AI doesn't actually buy you anything if there's a simpler, cheaper way of doing it. So don't do AI just because you want to do AI. So I think what you want to do is you want to have people in place who have the knowledge to figure out whether a problem is inherently hard to solve without AI or needs AI. And I think we sort of talked about earlier, which is if the rules that you're going to write are so complicated in order to solve a problem, you need AI. But if you can write a small set of rules and get by, you don't need AI.
I agree, because I often observe many people, we talk about AI, big data, and these things. But because at C-suite, I think one of the most important things is we have to make a judgment. Do we really need to use analytics or big data things? Because blindly, even we bring big data tools and so on, if we cannot create value that exceed the cost, because accumulating data, collecting data, hiring talent, a lot of talent, it's a cost. If we cannot, the value we can create from there, if the value cannot exceed the cost, that's kind of a question I have. Maybe longer it may pay off. But yeah, I agree, because we really have to make a judgment whether do we really need AI and so on. And do we have can you please share your, if possible, can you share your experience at Megagon CEO? What's the challenge?
Megagon was a research lab, so it wasn't more than 25 people. CEO sounds fancy, but it was a small research group. But we didn't have an issue of, I knew everybody by name, and there was one person doing the budget, so there was no issue of big data. But I think, to your point, I think it's hard for me to imagine corporations that don't need data tools to run today. There's any corporation that has any amount of customers and stuff going on needs data management and analytics to just understand that things are going well. Spreadsheets don't scale forever. But the next step after that is big data or just data management. Forget about big data. Just good analytics tools, right? They're pretty common and they give you pretty standard services today. But whether you need AI in order to build on that big data, then I agree with you. The value is not always there.
Thank you very much. Because I was always wondering this type of area. So because time is coming up, the one last, not a question, but can you, because we have an audience, young audience, PhD students, and maybe some of them may be undergraduate, I don't know. But at least we have PhD students from business background and computer engineering. Can you please any advice to them, please?
A ton of advice. PhD students in computer science, I recommend PhD students to study things outside of their discipline. So if you're a computer scientist, go and take a few courses in psychology, or go and take a few courses in business, or in chemistry, or something like that. And the reason that I recommend this is that it's not just the topic area that is different. It's also the way of thinking. If you're a computer scientist, you're thinking in a very particular set of patterns that, for example, a medical doctor doesn't think that way. Okay, medical doctors think in terms of certain heuristics, or I don't actually know how they think, but they don't think like computer scientists that, you know, we think in terms of algorithms and computers and what we can store and what we can query and stuff like that. So you find later on in life that you need to work with people who come from disciplines where they think differently. And you want to be able, when you're young, to experience how that discipline thinks. Even if you don't remember so much about the topic area itself, you want to go through that thinking to learn how to think the way they're thinking. So psychologists think differently, and chemists think differently, and computer science thinks differently, and business people definitely think differently. So just experience all those ways of thinking when you're young. It will pay off later when you're actually interacting with people in the workplace.
Thank you very much. It's yeah, I think it's very important because these days, even academia, it's very interdisciplinary. Yep. Data science area too, because someone from sports background may join that area, because diversity and inclusion is very important, because we bring a lot of various aspects. It's very important for management as well. And thank you very much for
a data science tool, right? If you're trying to develop a really good data science tool, if you need to think about how your users are thinking, right? To develop the right rules, the right tools, you need to know how your customers are thinking. Your customers are not computer scientists. They're people in some other area.
Agree. Thank you very much. We would like to continue this discussion, but it's time to stop. But thank you, Alon, because I really appreciate your kindness. Because of the budget restriction, we couldn't pay anything, but you kindly accepted, and you kindly trained an Australian community and provided very insightful ideas and new thinking to us. I really appreciate that. And thank you very much, Alon, again. And have a great day, everyone. See you next time. Bye.